Supposed Bible contradiction. Did Jesus claim no one has ever ascended into heaven? In John 3:13, Jesus states, "No one has ascended into heaven except he who descended from heaven, the Son of Man." However, this seems to contradict passages in the Old Testament. 2 Kings 2:11 says that Elijah and Elisha were together. Then, as they still went on and talked, behold, chariots of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. Similarly, Genesis 5 states, "When Enoch had lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him." Which implies Enoch was also taken up to heaven to be with God. So did Jesus contradict these passages in the Old Testament, which mention two men who ascended into heaven? This argument only...
Now, to be honest, I am not even aware of there are stories of some individuals that have supposedly go to heaven in the Bible or in the Old Testament. So that's interesting.
Succeeds if we divorce John 3:13 from its context. When we read verse 13 with the surrounding verses, it is clear Jesus is stating that no one has ascended into heaven to bring down the message that he descended with. It is not evident in many English translations, but D.A. Carson notes, verse 13 is connected to verse 12, because it begins with the Greek word for "and," which many translations leave out. So
the translation can choose to leave out words like this, is it? Because it's not significant, I guess, by the understanding of those who translate.
Verse 13 is meant to be connected and build on what verses 11 and 12 have already stated. "Truly, truly, I say to you, we speak of what we know and bear witness to what we have seen, but you do not receive our testimony. If I told you earthly things and you did not believe, how can you believe if I tell you heavenly things?" The next verse builds on this and so constrains what is said in verse 13. The verse is meant to be understood to mean that no one has ascended into the heavens and brought back heavenly wisdom, which is the context of what Jesus is speaking about. He is simply stating that no one on earth has gone to heaven and returned with the wisdom that he can offer.
So what's the purpose of the two individuals before to go into heaven? It's not to bring down any message, I guess.
Craig Keener says, Jesus' signs had communicated to Nicodemus and his colleagues Jesus' divine origin. Now Jesus attests his revelation on the basis of his own origin and experience. That only someone from heaven could truly reveal heavenly matters would have functioned as a logical argument in Mediterranean antiquity. This is like when I get emails from people asking me specifics about heaven, expecting me to know the answer somehow. I typically reply that I have no idea because none of us have gone and can report back to answer these specific questions. Do not mean to say no one has ever gone to heaven or invalidate near-death experiences. I am merely stating we do not have access to the information because we live on earth and cannot travel to heaven to obtain the information. Likewise, Jesus is stating no one has ascended into heaven and obtained the information he has now brought down. The verse in context is not a blanket statement that no one has gone to heaven. It is a claim that no one from earth has ascended into heaven and brought back wisdom. The cultural context supports this understanding, because Jesus is likely alluding to two passages in apocryphal works. Baruch 3:29 states, "Who hath gone up into heaven and taken her and brought her down from the clouds?" Wisdom of Solomon 9:16-17 says, "We can hardly guess at what is on earth, and what is at hand we find with labor. But who has traced out what is in the heavens? Who has learned your counsel, unless you have given wisdom and sent your Holy Spirit from on high?" Jesus is referring to this common belief in Jewish works, that no one has gone to heaven and obtained heavenly wisdom to bring back to earth. But now, Jesus adds that he has descended from heaven to offer this wisdom. So this passage supports Jesus' existence prior to his birth and his divine nature. It also implicitly challenges the validity of works like 1 Enoch, which suggests that Enoch obtained revelations from heaven and brought them back to earth. Some argue this verse could not have been uttered by Jesus and was made up later by his apostles, because it implies Jesus has already ascended into heaven, in that it states, "No one has ascended into heaven except he who descended from heaven." So the way it reads in English implies Jesus as the only one who has already ascended into heaven. But Jesus' ascension did not occur until after his resurrection, and therefore, after Jesus would have uttered these words to Nicodemus. However, the scholar D.A. Carson notes the Greek words that are translated as "except" can also mean "but rather." This is likely the case in places like Revelation 21:27. Those written in the Lamb's Book of Life are not thought of as unclean at this point, and merely given an exception. The verse is contrasting the unclean with the saints from the Book of Life. And likewise, in John 3:13, Jesus is contrasting himself, who descended from heaven, with the fact that no one on earth has ascended to obtain wisdom. Thus Carson says, The flow of the argument in the peculiar perfect has ascended, conspire to focus the exception rather differently. Jesus can speak of heavenly things, and no one else has ascended into heaven and remained there, so as to be able to speak authoritatively about heavenly things. But only the one who has come down from heaven is equipped to do so. The passage is not necessarily anachronistic, and does not mean to imply Jesus already ascended into heaven.
Oh yeah, this is going off on a tangent, right? But because normally we assume the concept that we know is similar when others using the same word or the same thing. We assume this is the same thing, right? For example, in this topic of heaven, is the concept of heaven for Islam and Christianity the same? Because all of this indicate heaven is the place of God, right? Meaning God is in heaven, and before that, and Jesus come from there, right? So is that the concept of heaven in the Christianity, meaning that the place of God, the place where God resides or something? I'm not sure what the word that you use, but is that the concept? Because in Islam, heaven and hell is created by God, right? So both are creation. But from how I hear what Christians say about heaven, it's like that's where God is, and we want to be there with God, something like that, right? So it is. I'm not sure whether heaven is created by God, or it's with, meaning from the beginning God is in heaven. I'm not sure.
So once we read the verse in context, there is no reason to think Jesus is making a blanket statement that no one has ever ascended into heaven. Instead, he's talking about how no one from earth has been able to ascend to heaven to obtain wisdom and bring it back to earth. Thus, this supposed contradiction can be resolved.
Alright, so yeah. Again, one of the things that, I guess those who see this as this is contradiction that you need to ask or to respond to, is how to understand. Basically, I guess, what's being discussed there. Anyway, so in terms of how one verse is actually in continuation than before, I'm familiar with that discussion, because in the Quran we also read throughout the narrative, right? And it's very interesting that I think this kind of video I should told some Christian to watch, because normally when they criticize certain verses of the Quran, they ignore the verse before and after, right? Which meaning the answer that I can give sometimes just please read the verse before and after. It already answer your point. But I guess for those who don't even do those kind of things with their own books, will not have the same decency or the same practice, the same discipline to do with other books as well. Anyway, thank you for watching. See you next time.